Do you know what's even sweeter than the coffee ice cream and chocolate chip cookies that I just consumed? Do you want to know? These savings for the Steam Winter Sale 2024. Like usual, we did our overall roundup yesterday, and now I want to focus in on a genre near and dear to my heart, RPGs. But I want to mix it up a little bit. Normally I give a brief overview for the game, and give my general thoughts about it. That way I can have each game be a bit shorter so I can cover more games per video. I want to focus in on fewer entries with this video, but really go in depth with my thoughts on them. Because let's face it, there's a ton of games out there. And unless you're like the best speedrunner of all time, chances are you're not going to be able to play all of these games, and you may have heard of them, but you may not really know what they're about. Because we have some absolute bangers today. Let's get into it right now, shall we? Back at the Game Awards, The Witcher 4 had an actual trailer. And while no gameplay was shown there, The Witcher is one of the most beloved and one of my most beloved RPG series of all time. So much so, in fact, that right above me on my wall, I have two posters from The Witcher 3. So what makes The Witcher tick? Because, oh my god, The Witcher 3 came out in 2015. It feels like it came out 3 years ago. I won't personally recommend Witcher 1, mainly because that game has aged like milk. Some people could probably get into it, I just couldn't. I really do endorse and love The Witcher 2, Assassins of Kings, and The Witcher 3, Wild Hunt. And I like them for different reasons. If you want a more small-scale, tight-knit adventure, The Witcher 2 is going to be more up your alley. There's still a lot there and a lot of depth there, but it's a more bite-sized adventure compared to the gargantuan behemoth that The Witcher 3 is. The Witcher 3 is a massive open-world RPG, and in these games you take up the mantle of the Witcher, namely Geralt of Rivia. These are very mature games. I could just mention the Bloody Baron, and anyone who is in the know will just have a wave of emotion crash over them. The storytelling and the actual plot in these games are elite in my opinion, and there's a good blend between player choice and just a really well-crafted narrative, with a ton of memorable characters, and combat that won't be for everyone, but I do enjoy it. It's not so focused on the moment-to-moment gameplay loop, as it is on finding out what you're going to fight, and then preparing accordingly, and then going against that fight, and utilizing your prior knowledge of that specific species of monster, or person, and leveraging that knowledge and the tools at your disposal to overcome the fight. If you want, you can just bash your head against the wall repeatedly if you want to, or you can find out what spell it's weak against, or what potions you could consume to give yourself an edge over that specific type of monster. The magic system is relatively toned down, but it's effective. Shoot out swaths of fire or cloak yourself in a shield to protect you for another hit. Put down a trap so enemies can't evade out of it, and relatively simple stuff like that, combined with an amazing soundtrack, and it can get the blood pumping. And the scenery in both of these games is just gorgeous. Now, The Witcher 4 is lined up to have Ciri be the new protagonist going into the future for this new saga of The Witcher. She is not a new character by any stretch of the imagination. If you want to see her actually grow up and pretty much be trained under Geralt, Witcher 3 does a pretty good job of doing that. The storytelling tends to be pretty dark and macabre at times, and can be really depressing, but it's just juxtaposed by Rule of Cool that The Witcher just does so well, alongside really good character development and just characterization across the board. Especially in The Witcher 3, it can be really overwhelming at first when you first get transported to the open world proper, because everything is pretty much over-leveled for you, and it can take a minute to find out where you're supposed to go, but when you get past that initial hurdle, you're fine. And the game just flows from there. It's a beautiful world to explore, beautiful music to listen to. It's just an overall amazing experience. And if you're a big fan of RPGs, full-heartedly recommend The Witcher. In my opinion, required playing. You can get all 3 Witcher games for 84% off for $11.22, or if you just want The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, it's 80% off for $7.99. Or if you want to go back and try out The Witcher 2, again, I recommend doing that, it is 85% off for $2.99. Amazing deals. Hee-ho, hee-ho! Shin Megami Tensei is a rather interesting franchise. You may know its spin-off, Persona. And while Persona gets a lot of the publicity and popularity nowadays, it was originally a spin-off of the main series Shin Megami Tensei, and there's 2 games on Steam that are in discount for SMT. Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne HD Remaster, and then Shin Megami Tensei 5 Vengeance. These games do not play and do not flow like Persona. But if you have played the recent Atlus game, and arguable Game of the Year Metaphor v Fantasio, you may enjoy Shin Megami Tensei 3, and probably 5. I've been diving into 3 lately myself, because the combat system is very similar. In fact, they took the press turn icon system from Shin Megami Tensei and brought it into Metaphor v Fantasio. For those who may not know, the press turn system, it's a turn-based RPG, and when you have your turn, you get a set number of turn icons. Whenever you perform an action, it'll use up a turn icon, and various conditions will either gain you additional turn icons or make you lose them. Hitting an enemy's weakness or landing a crit gets you an extra turn icon. Good stuff. Missing or getting your attack repelled and blocked, stuff like that, that's pretty bad news, and you're gonna lose even more turn icons. And the brilliance of this system that I've came to really appreciate in Metaphor v Fantasio, and I've started to really come to love in Shin Megami Tensei 3 as I make my way through that game, is that the enemies are also bound to the system. So if they hit your weakness, they'll gain additional turns, and that's generally not good because these games can be rather notorious for their difficulty, or what I've kind of come around to find out, you just have to learn how to play the game. And if you can get your opponent, and namely boss fights, into positions where they're not hitting weaknesses or their attacks are getting blocked each turn, or you're just dodging, you can turn a lot of these fights from giant slogs that are just absolutely difficult, like trying to break down a brick with a broken pinky toe or something. And you can feel like this god of war who has descended upon Shin Megami Tensei to teach these demons what it means to actually fight. It can feel super satisfying to get this right. And while Persona is also known for the social simulator elements that are juxtaposed with the dungeon crawling, Shin Megami Tensei is largely just the dungeon crawling. There's shops and NPCs to talk to, but there's no like calendar system, at least that I've discovered, akin to Persona. It's a more straightforward JRPG predicated on its combat system, which is really fun and satisfying in my opinion. Memorable boss fights, really funny dialogue, like funnier than you think it'd be. So what's the setting of Shin Megami Tensei? Because I have played a little bit of SMT 5 back in the day when it first came out on the Switch. I haven't touched Vengeance yet. I just hear that Vengeance is better across the board than the original release of SMT 5, but from what I've played of the original SMT 5 and from what I've played of Nocturne so far, these games are generally set in a post-apocalyptic, pretty much hellscape, where demons, that some of which you may recognize from Persona, probably because they come from Shin Megami Tensei, roam the land and you can party up with them and do battle with them. And the game really embraces that darker tone and atmosphere. Like SMT 3 pretty much starts with the apocalypse, and you're just thrown into this post-apocalyptic Tokyo hellscape, and you're like, okay, pick up the pieces and go on this JRPG adventure. The PC version for 3 at least does come with 3 different versions of SMT 3. You have the basic version, which is like the original release of SMT 3, but then you're gonna have like the better versions. I don't know how else to describe them. If you're familiar with Atlus and you're familiar with how they do it in Persona, where they'll release a game in its like base state, and then like a year or 2 down the line, they'll release a better version. It's kind of like that, where you have Maniacs and Chronicle. More content, a new ending, more boss fights, and also a new character. And I've been playing Maniacs, so I just run into Dante from Devil May Cry on occasion. It's really funny. It's also really funny how I absolutely obliterated him in my fight with him. But yeah, really fun game. And if you played Metaphor recently and you just crave more of that combat loop, I would absolutely recommend checking out Shin Megami Tensei. Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne HD Remaster, holy crap, what a name, is 70% off for $14.99, and Shin Megami Tensei 5 Vengeance is 30% off for $41.99. I'm not gonna make this a habit of talking about a pre-order, but I'll make an exception for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, because this was my co-game of the year alongside Metaphor v Fantasio for 2024. I love this game to death when I played it on the PS5, but it is coming to PC in January, and it's 30% off right now, so why do I love this game? It's just a really good Final Fantasy game. Remake introduced a new combat system into Final Fantasy as an IP. It was a blend between the modern real-time action combat that Final Fantasy has been embracing in recent years, while also blending that alongside the ATB system that the older Final Fantasies, namely Final Fantasy VII, the original, were known for. And I think it did a really good job of blending these two ideas together, where you still have real-time combat, but you're generating this gauge, and when you want to spend that gauge on utilizing items or casting a spell or an ability, it slows the time down to make it feel borderline turn-based. I thought it was pretty well executed back in Remake. In Rebirth, it's taken up a notch, and everything that Remake pretty much did, I think Rebirth does better. I'm going to dispel a notion I keep seeing brought up every now and then. That's the idea that these Remake games aren't complete packages by themselves. It's just categorically wrong. And in fact, the amount of content on offer when it comes to Rebirth, and the amount of quality content at that, is rather surprising. The quality of the overall story will be heavily dependent on the execution of the third game, which will probably come out in 2027. But right now, both Remake and Rebirth have extremely solid beginning, middle, and ends. This is not the exact same story as the 1997 game. It's not. And it's kind of funny how people still don't understand that, despite the fact that it's communicated rather coherently in-game. But what I think Rebirth and Remake do so well is the characterization, and just slowing down and taking these moments that could have probably used a bit more time in the original, and really fleshing out these characters. The voice acting is top tier, the dialogue is top tier, the music is absolutely enchanting. No Promises to Keep is still a song that I listen to regularly. Combine that with an amazing cast of characters and a great world, I don't think Rebirth does everything perfect. There's a couple of minigames that are more frustrating than anything, and I think the open world design can kind of devolve to Ubisoft like Tower Collectathon and to-do list activities a bit too much, but even when the game does devolve to that on occasion, it still interjects really incredible storylines into a lot of the side content that fleshes out the characters and the characterization and the character development. And when paired alongside just how fun the combat is in Rebirth, they did an amazing job of taking that combat loop from Remake and just making it better, with a few special additions, pretty much allowing Cloud to just be in the air all the time makes any aerial enemy way more exciting and fun to actually fight. But also, the big additions, synergy skills and synergy abilities. Based on who you have in your party, you get different synergy skills and different synergy abilities. You have to work your way up to utilize synergy abilities by building up a gauge in combat, but synergy skills, you can just spam these things if you really want to, and they can be extremely powerful. And they're just the perfect accoutrement to pair alongside the combat loop that is brought over from Remake, and it just creates a whole greater than the sum of its parts. And I think enemy variety and boss design in Rebirth is a step up from back in Remake, and there's a lot of memorable fights that are just fun to fight. And there's so much whimsy. Rebirth does an amazing job, just like Remake did, at capturing that essence of what made Final Fantasy VII so memorable and so beloved. Pairing the deep, dark, emotional story beats and story moments alongside the powerful themes and messaging that FF7 has and is famous for, but also making you fall in love with the world by how just wacky and whimsical and colorful it is. And I'm starting to become a believer that the makings of an amazing RPG, it's not mandatory, but if you have a really good card game, good God, does it do a lot. Queen's Blood in FF7 Rebirth is addicting, just like Gwent back in The Witcher 3. Yeah, Witcher 3 has an entire card game I failed to mention, by the way. But so does Rebirth. Queen's Blood is so dang fun, and is like weirdly important to the lore, and you wouldn't think it would be. Like, it's not mandatory or anything, but it's nice. As you're going around the world, you may find NPCs that you can duel in a game of cards, and then when you beat them senseless, you can acquire their own cards to add to your collection to make various decks. There's a lot of depth here, like more than you think there'd be. And there's entire tournament arcs in-game for Queen's Blood. It's awesome. And however wacky and silly you think the Gold Saucer could be in Rebirth, it's even bigger and better. Chocobo Racing is basically Mario Kart in Rebirth. Actually, it's like Chocobo Racing. But it's really well handled. And the only reason I'm talking about this game, despite it not being out on PC yet, is because I have played the game on PS5. And assuming the port is halfway competent, would advise just keeping an eye out for that one. But if the port is halfway competent, I full-heartedly recommend Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. What an amazing experience this game is. I would recommend, though, playing Remake first. That one's not on sale right now, but you can get a bundle for Remake and Rebirth that is on sale, so let's get into it. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is 30% off for $48.99, or you can get the Final Fantasy VII Remake and Rebirth Twin Pack for 30% off for $69.99. Nice. The Fallen Leaves tell a story. Elden Ring needs no introduction. It's Elden Ring. This game took the industry over by storm back when it came out in 2022. And I can understand that a FromSoft game can be a really daunting thing to jump into, especially if you've never really played these games before, because they're known for their difficulty and they're known for having these giant brick walls you bash your head against, possibly for hundreds of attempts until you eventually overcome it. I can understand that can be off-putting for a lot of people, and it won't be a game for everyone. However, I do think people kind of ignore a lot of the really cool elements Elden Ring has, all on the altar of talking about how difficult it can be. The name of the game when it comes to Elden Ring is that it's one of the most incredible RPG worlds I've ever had the pleasure of experiencing. And this game didn't fully click with me when I first played it on release. But then I came back to it right before the DLC Shadow of the Erdtree came out, and I gave the game another playthrough. And that's when it all clicked for me. You see, over the last few years, my gaming preferences have kind of altered and changed a bit. And while I once got annoyed by a lot of things in Elden Ring when it came to boss design and stuff like that, I really came to appreciate and love it relatively recently. The name of the game when it comes to Elden Ring is customization. There's so many different builds and playstyles at your disposal in Elden Ring, and that doesn't get talked about enough in my opinion, compared to how difficult and grueling some fights and encounters can be. Because you can cheese this game, do not get me wrong. There are builds that can absolutely trivialize a lot of the fights in this game, because it's not the difficulty that FromSoft really try to be about. You see, when it comes to game design, FromSoft generally tries to present a singular challenge. It's why the games don't have difficulty options. The game provides a single difficulty in front of you and a single design of a boss. And you can argue the game does have difficulty options just in terms of what you utilize to overcome the fight. If you want to use lightning spells on the guy that's resistant to lightning, you can do that. You can. Probably not the smartest thing to do, but you can do it. Or you can study up, build accordingly, and overcome the fight by utilizing game knowledge and your own effort. Because the game at the end of it doesn't care how you overcome the boss fight. It doesn't care how you overcome a certain camp of enemies. It just wants you to find a way to do it. And whether that's just with a giant two-handed sword and you go and bash things over the head with it, or you pair that alongside magic, bows, items, some kind of cheese, using a giant Kamehameha beam called Azure Comet, or Comet Azure, whatever. That's where the brilliance of the game design behind Elden Ring lies. All that customization, all those tools that the game is willing to put in your back pocket and allow you to find a way to use them. Summoning giant dragon heads out of thin air to breathe scarlet rot or lightning upon your enemies. Summoning a giant bow of magical energy to blast your targets with arrows made of magic. Using various weapon skills, or navigating the extremely dense open-world map that Elden Ring has. This game has brilliant level design. For instance, you may stumble upon an elevator in the middle of the woods, and you go down it, and what you may discover at the bottom of that well is far bigger and more magical than whatever you could have imagined. FromSoft doesn't tell a story in a more traditional cutscene-oriented way that a lot of RPGs tend to utilize. It's far more built on atmosphere, talking to various NPCs, the occasional cutscene, like very rarely, and reading a lot of item descriptions, and putting all the pieces of the puzzle together at your own pace. There's a bunch of different quest lines and endings that you can pursue and go down, Ronnie for the win, all in the goal of becoming the Elden Lord. It's what FromSoft does best. Have you navigate a once prosperous but now fallen kingdom, putting the pieces together, fighting giant named enemies, and it's just absolutely brilliantly designed in my opinion. Elden Ring is 40% off for $35.99. For the final game of the video, I want to talk about Dragon's Dogma Dark Arisen, because Dragon's Dogma 2 is a bit polarizing, and it didn't particularly grab me, mainly because my first impressions with Dragon's Dogma 2 was on my old PC that could barely run it on low graphics at 20 FPS. However, Dragon's Dogma Dark Arisen is a game that I did try out, and I did manage to dump a bunch of hours into it, and I loved the game from what I played of it. It feels like an older RPG because, well, it is. And while that does kind of come along with some jank, I think the brilliance in its actual game design and what it sets out to do is able to outshine the jank and honestly turn that element that maybe wouldn't hold up in a more modern RPG, but in the confines and context of an older RPG can kind of make it endearing. What is Dragon's Dogma Dark Arisen? Well, it's an RPG, duh, in an open world. The idea is that a dragon invades your home village and for some reason picks you out of the crowd, takes your heart, and consumes it, turning you into the Arisen. And now you must go on a quest to go after said dragon, paired alongside the pawns. The pawns are pretty much your party members. They're these creatures that are not from this world, but they serve as pretty much these blank slate characters for you to have as your party members. You create one pawn when you make the game, well, a new game, alongside your player character, and other people out there can then utilize your pawn in their parties, granting you the occasional reward. Likewise, you can use other players' pawns to fill out your party. And the combat in this game is so dang cool. It's not so much focused on narrative and a whole bunch of cutscenes and stuff like that. It's focused on natural, organic moments that you come across in the world. You may get a quest to go from point A to point B to do whatever, and along the way you may find various cool monsters to overcome and fight. You may find another quest and stuff like that. It's a world you can easily lose yourself in. And I think what makes this game work so well is how fun the combat system is. One, the magic in this game is absolutely crazy. It's just big and awesome. But what I like to do is I like to roll warrior and go for a giant two-handed weapon. And you may go, Jmulls, that sounds like the most stereotypical, like, RPG character of all time. Yes, it is. But what they do, right, is they give you a series of abilities that allow you to charge an overhead swing. These can go really long, like upwards of 20 to 30 seconds of just charging, and you may go, Jmulls, that sounds boring as all hell. And it would be if when you didn't bring the hammer down, it didn't send enemies flying into the stratosphere or like all the way out, like you just hit a grand slam in the World Series. Good God, can it just be really visceral and satisfying to land these hits? Like, it may be from Capcom, but don't expect Devil May Cry or anything like that, but it thrives on its simplicity. It thrives on its visceral combat. The music is also awesome. I love the main menu theme. I'll just sit in the main menu listening to that theme for as long as I want. Or I'll just look it up on YouTube, let's be fair here. But still, it's really dang good. Dragon's Dogma just has this nostalgic charm to it, where even if you didn't play it back in the day like I didn't, you load the game up and it's the way the main menu sounds and the option menu sounds when you're maneuvering around it, and just the overall look of the game and the lighting. It looks aged, but it holds up and has this charm to it. The game has this weird magic about it. It's hard to explain. I just find myself, when I play this game, losing myself in it. And just because of how different and cool all the classes are, and just how much there is in terms of the combat, there's a lot of replayability here. And I can see why some people just come back to this game time and time again just to play another time. Dragon's Dogma Dark Arisen is 84% off for $4.79. That'll do it for me. Those are 5 RPGs that I full-heartedly recommend, available right now in the Steam Winter Sale 2024. But there's a bunch of other really cool games you may want to go and keep your eye out for. Games like Visions of Mana, the Monster Hunter games, The Lies of Peace, Cyberpunk 2077. There's a bunch of games. So leave a comment down below with what games you are picking up with this winter sale and what other games and RPGs in particular you would recommend other people to keep an eye out for. Thank you all for tuning in. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe. It would really help the channel out and help support future content, and I greatly appreciate it. Stay safe, have a great day, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye, everybody, until we meet again.